Today I want to give you a little perspective. I started this process and learned about it back in 1993 when I met my mentor of 32 years now, wow, almost 33 years in February, when we both attended a J. Abraham seminar in Los Angeles. I was running the property tax business that I co-founded, and Dan was looking at the seminar circuit and was going around to the high-end ones, of which Jay was one. And so we happened to meet at that. Kind of the rest is history. But I want to give you some perspective. This is a hard process. I tell you that. I tell you the truth on that. The process is proven. Whether you can do it, I always say I don't know because I don't know you, except for those people that I mentor, certainly. But in some ways, it's never been easier. So I got to refer to some notes here to remember all these different ways. But back in the 90s, there weren't anywhere near the tools. And let me give you some perspective. And a lot of this you're going to find hard to believe because you haven't lived in this world. You probably weren't alive in 1993 for many of you. But there was no LinkedIn. There was no Zoom. There was no email. I got my first email in 1995, to give you some perspective. So how did you do it in those days? Well, what Dan and I have both referred to as shoe leather. You know, if I wanted to have a meeting, I had to network to find somebody. I had to call them. I usually, when I lived in upstate New York, had to get on a train and schlep down to New York City and take a subway and meet with them and then come back. And so in those days, one meeting could take you a whole day when you looked at it that way. Today, I can do 3 Zoom meetings with law firms. And when I recently did that, I was like, wow, what a difference. So let me tell you what we had back then. Rolodexes, and you see the image. Rolodex just held calling cards and it spun around. Sometimes they were a foot in diameter, but those were your contacts. There was no CRM. There was nothing online that you had that way because it wasn't an online. Printed directories, things like Dun & Bradstreet, you could use those things certainly. Phones, which were landlines in the beginning. Nobody had cell phones, mobile phones, so different. Hard to believe now you start to drive in a car and you forget your phone and you have a panic attack and have to go back and get it. We had to stop at payphones, hardly any of those around anymore. Fax machines, there are medical professionals that still use fax machines, but when Dan and I first started working together, everything was by fax. He would handwrite me a fax, I'd handwrite it back, back and forth. There were computers. They weren't like today, but there were also typewriters as well. And there were networking events. You physically got on a plane, shook hands, went to conventions, that sort of thing. Some of the other things in the image that I put up, rotary phones, don't know what those are, egg beaters, the spinny thing, typewriter, Rolodex. And before streaming music, 8 tracks. And that's what those in that image are. I had an 8-track player in a car. You flipped it into almost like a cassette, but it was much, much bigger. So fast forward now from the 90s to today. And let's look at what the landscape is. So you've got LinkedIn, over 1 billion people that you have access to. CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, industry expert, professionals, law firms. All the AI tools like ChatGPT, where it can help you, although I caution you, don't treat ChatGPT like some omnipotent power that can write all your emails and letters. It's a tool. Treat it like that. But still ought to do a lot of that yourself. Email sequencing platforms, Mailshake, Apollo, Lemlist, things like that. CRM systems, that you can track people. You can put in follow-ups. It will remind you what you talked about 6 months ago with somebody, as opposed to just having all that on paper and trying to find that. Very, very different. Online databases, we've talked about InfoUSA, Data Axle, Search Funder, all those things that make it so much easier. Professional networks, without leaving the comfort of your chair. You can connect with people, as we do in my mentoring. People in Australia, people in Europe, people in South America, on and on and on. And then texting and voice messages. You normally used a landline phone, and you might have gotten an answering machine, but not usually in a professional environment. In homes, yes. So you ended up talking to a secretary. Not very many of those around anymore. YouTube, podcasts, in terms of connecting with people, getting your message out. And then, digital signatures. You had to physically, still do in some cases, but sign things, send those things, FedEx it or overnight it, etc. So you can reach more people in an hour today than you could in a week back then. And think about that. Some of you are sending hundreds of LinkedIn messages, hundreds of letters a week. You could still do letters, but you had to, in the beginning, type those letters. Crazy. So the point of that is the bottleneck is no longer the tools that you use to connect with people. Myriad of those now. So in the 90s, yes, it took action. It still does today. And action is the number one thing that people need to step up if they know what to do. And I would highly encourage you to know what to do. So what hasn't changed in that time? What hasn't changed is people still refer or respond to confidence. People, the same skills in sales back then still apply today. They still want to know your why. Why are you doing this? Why is it important? Are you going to quit? Do you have integrity? Can they trust you? All those things. They still want to know, and this is really important, as you write letters, as you talk to people, think from their standpoint. What's in it for them? Not what's in it for you, but what's in it for them. And then they still gravitate towards those who follow up. Depends which statistic you like, but most statistics say that a sale happens after 4 or more follow-ups, 80% usually, and only 20%, and that's being really generous, have that many follow-ups. Most people don't follow up once. They send one letter, no response, done. One email, no response, done. So when you tell me outreach is hard, maybe it does feel that emotionally, but practically, if you think about it, you have so many tools. Outreach via the tools shouldn't be the problem. Using those tools and causing that action to happen and following up on that, that's the real key. So, did people, including myself, do this process with a Rolodex and a phone, a fax machine, and shoe leather? Yes, we did. But now you can use AI, you can use LinkedIn, you can use your smartphone. So in terms of that, there's no excuses. And as is my moniker that Dan gave me back 30 years ago or so, never ask, never get. The more you ask for what you want, keeping in mind what's important for the other person, and that's a really good never ask, never get. Understand who you're talking to. Understand what their needs are. Understand what they want. Work to build trust. All those things. Today, this process is easier with respect to the tools than it ever has been, and that will continue to be the case. So I hope that helps. I hope you are not stuck in the past. I can assure you you're not using an 8-track player and a Rolodex. Almost certainly. I found mine a couple months ago, which was like, wow, from 30 years ago. So if you don't know what to do, learn the process. This process does work, and you know how to do that. We've talked about that. But I hope that helps. I hope it helps to frame the tools that are available today and that you have at your disposal, and that you can reach so many more people than you could in the 90s when I started to do this.